Welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast, a podcast about stage musicals that have been legally filmed and publicly distributed. The Filmed Live Musicals website contains information on nearly 200 musicals that have been captured live. Check it out at filmedlivemusicals.com. And now, on with the show. Welcome to episode 13 of the Filmed Live Musicals podcast. I'm your host, Luisa Lyons, and joining me today is Adam Lenson. Based in London, Adam is a director, producer, dramaturg, and musical theatre specialist. He was recently included in the Stage 100, a list recognizing theatre makers for their extraordinary achievements in 2020. He is the founder of Signal and Signal Online, programs for incubating new musical theatre, Make Your Own Musicals, which provides activity packs for children, and Theatrical Solutions, which offers affordable services for theatrical live streaming. Welcome, Adam.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. When did you first fall in love with musical theatre?
I think the moment I could probably track it to was when I was about 15. I'm from London, so I'm very fortunate in that way. I had been to see musicals in the West End when I was a kid, but with my parents, but sort of like once a year to go and see the big West End musicals. So I had seen Les Mis and Miss Saigon and Joseph and His Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But I think the moment it first clicked was I went to see a student production of Company by Stephen Sondheim that my brother was musical directing. And I was like, this is so much more conceptual, I suppose, and mature, and reminded me of film in the way it was in sort of its kind of maturity and its structural audaciousness and I suppose ambiguity. So I remember thinking, and I'd been a big film fan, a big video game fan as a kind of child through to teenager. And so, yeah, Company. And then I went to the Edinburgh Festival and I saw that there was a production of another Stephen Sondheim show called Merrily We Roll Along, which was just a student production by Royal Holloway. And I went to go see that because I recognized the name Stephen Sondheim, and I read in the flyer that it went backwards. And at the time, I had just sort of fallen in love with the movie Memento, the Christopher Nolan movie that also goes backwards. So again, I was just thinking, God, like this form is so flexible and mature. So yeah, I was about 15 or 16 then. Then I bought all of the Sondheim CDs I could. I remember listening to Sunday in the Park with George in the car as I was like learning to drive, which is kind of an unusual choice for a 17-year-old. But
music and art left turn here.
Exactly. It's like red, orange. And then I used to go to the sadly missed CD shop, record shop in London called Dress Circle, and I used to pick up CDs from their kind of like new shelves, most of which were kind of like Ghostlight or PS Classics kind of musical theatre imprints. And that's where I discovered Jason Robert Brown and Michael John LaChiusa and Adam Gettel and the sort of Sondheim's descendants, Janine Tesori. And I think at that point I was pretty hooked, basically.
I love that Sondheim was your gateway drug.
Yeah. I mean, as I think it's a lot of people's, just because I think he did something that I still aspire to do now, which is kind of disrupt received notions of what a musical should sound like or be about. His musicals, they all sounded like him, but they all sounded so different from one another, and they were just about such wildly different things, and they were so formally audacious and smart and emotive. And because that's the other thing, is like I really like smart things because I'm a big nerd, and I'm a really overly emotional person too. So I like where the two things sort of intersect. I think in England, I'm always seen as like a little bit of an oddity for how overly emotional I am, which is I've noticed that Americans tend to be sort of more forthright with their emotions than British people are sometimes allowed to be, which I think is a reason why musicals are potentially undervalued in this country, or have been. But that's a longer thing.
When you were listening to cast recordings and CDs, were you also watching the productions? Sondheim particularly, a lot of his productions are available on film or VHS back in the day, and now DVD. Was that something that you watched as well, or you consumed?
If I'm totally honest, not really. I don't know why. I think probably at the time, because actually I remember there were American DVDs. I remember being able to get those kinds of like Sondheim DVDs. They were like region 1 only. And at that point, Europe and UK is region 2, and it was hard to get American things. I remember the imports were expensive, and I didn't have a all region DVD player, like boring things like that. But no, I remember I read them, and I got loads of cast recordings. And I also think to an extent there was this kind of, I don't know about other people, but once I've seen something, I was less interested in directing it, which isn't to say that that's the only reason to engage with theatre. Most of that time I was just a fan, but as I became a student and started directing and thinking about putting shows on at university, I found that once I'd seen a good production of something, it kind of almost relieved me of ever wanting to do that myself, especially if it was really good. It's like I already saw. I went to see I saw a lot of the musicals I had loved at the Mini Chocolate Factory in its kind of first era. So I saw Sunday in the Park with George. I saw Tick Tick Boom. So that was when I was probably about 19,
Merrily We
20.
Roll Along.
Well, I worked on Merrily We Roll Along, actually. I was associate director on that. But yeah, it's so that was kind of a weird coming home to that show. But and once I saw that like amazing Daniel Evans, Jenna Russell production of Sunday in the Park with George, I was like, I don't need to see it again. Or do it again. That was just so extraordinary. I actually also always find that I find either seeing a production of a musical either makes me think, a good production either makes me think, great, that's done now, I don't need to think about that, or it makes me go, oh, I want to do that. Like, for example, it doesn't matter how many productions of Candide I see, I still want to do that show because it's so mad. I think there's a 1,000 different ways of directing it, but
And there are 1,000 different script versions too. So
well, exactly. Or Chess, or any of those kinds of musical, or Pippin, any like those musicals that are so open to directors' interpretations. But yeah, no, mostly listening, reading, and just kind of like I remember going to see The Drowsy Chaperone when I was in New York when that was first on, and I remember thinking there's that thing about the man in the chair in that show where he says, I've obsessed over this show my whole life and I've never even seen it. And I remember thinking that was like me and Follies because I've had all of the cast recordings, maybe 9. I ordered a tape of literally a cassette tape from eBay, which had like a bootleg of the 1970 production, audio bootleg. Yeah. I like obsessed over a lot of shows many years before I ever got to see them, which I think is one of the great things about musicals, is that because they're these like 3-dimensional things which you can appreciate differently in a bunch of different ways, whether that's on screen, in person, on recording, and they all give you some piece of that puzzle. I love that about musicals because it feels like probably 90% of the musicals I have a great affection for I've never seen. And as strange as that is, I do think the form can kind of live there as well as on stage.
Very interesting. So the impact of musicals being available through cast recordings, still they have very much a life, and they're alive and are made accessible just by having the cast recording available.
I think so. I mean, I think the act of listening to them is slightly different to listening to other music, because you kind of have to, I wasn't just listening to songs. I was like sort of finding a show and obsessing over it from beginning to end and listening to it on loop, and then reading either the libretto or like reading reviews or fragments of synopses, or sort of and building up a picture of a sort of collage of how it worked. But I guess this is why I'm, in my recent life, I'm a proponent of other forms of theatre other than just being in a theatre, because those pieces, there are pieces I've never seen, as I said, that are just as vivid to me as ones I have. And in some ways, if you spend years obsessing over a piece, seeing one production of it, especially because I'm a director, not that I don't love seeing other productions of other people's work, because I nearly always do. But sometimes if you've obsessed over a piece for like 10 years, seeing it can sometimes feel like not, different to all the possibilities living in your head.
Yes, I have definitely experienced that feeling before, and it's not that it's disappointing, but it just doesn't live up to what has been constructed in your head.
Mm.
So I'm curious when you first became aware of the potential of filming a show and streaming it.
It's really interesting because I look back on I've been doing this 12 years now. My first show was 2008, which was Ordinary Days by Adam Guan, which was my first show I directed professionally, and then I did Little Fish by Michael John LaCusa, both UK premieres, both which I'm extremely proud of, and nothing of them exists. Nothing. Like, I think we might have single camera like archive shots, but no kind of trailers, no sort of multicam films, nothing that you could endure watching. Not terrible sound. Like you couldn't sit and watch them and do anything except get like the basic idea of what they were. And me of today, that just seems so weird that I kind of let them evaporate. But I guess I do also have this very, as we all probably do in theatre, do have this sense that the actual physical production of a show is meant to be of its time and is meant to be ephemeral and is meant to be kind of enjoyed in the instances that it's created, and that looking back on it is slightly strange. And I guess me of then, I probably thought, there's a million to one chance that these shows might get cast recordings, and that's the way they live on. But filming just seemed impossible. It seemed expensive. It seemed like it would take incredibly high budget. Cameras were really expensive, even by factors of 10, I think, compared to what they cost now. It just seemed impossible.
Well, it's really extraordinary in those 12 years, you know, smartphones have come about and YouTube has come about and streaming has become a thing. And it didn't really exist. It was only the big companies like National Theatre or the Met that could afford the technology to be filming.
Or, or thought they could. I wonder now if maybe that idea of a barrier was a somewhat unreal. But I also think that you're putting so much energy into the making of the show and selling the tickets and getting audience in the room and making people care. And often I do slightly strange shows, or not even strange, just shows that you either haven't heard of yet, because I'm sort of addicted to making things that people don't know about yet. And that those are hard work in every department to make happen, whether it's because the show is still finding itself or selling tickets is harder. And I don't know, you don't think a lot about archiving them or capturing them for whatever after effect, and there weren't platforms to sell, and there weren't. My first productions of anything that was filmed with multicam were 2018, and those were literally filmed so that they could be sent to people to maybe think about a future life. They weren't
That was
intended.
like wasted.
Wasted, and the RINK, which obviously for rights reasons no one will ever see, but a multicam of that was done with the idea of it being able to be sent to venues and people, so that maybe it could have a future life. But the idea of it being preserved for audiences, even in 2018, Wasted was not captured for that purpose. It just happened that we looked at it and thought that's potentially good enough at this time to kind of release. To me, my first introduction to like filming stuff was when I started Signal, the concert series that I curate, which started in 2017. And for me, I wasn't referencing NT Live or Met Live or like the idea of audiences watching or selling shows. I was referencing YouTube capture of 54 Below and Joe's Pub, and people like newmusicaltheatre.com in America, and artists like Kerrigan and Loudermilk and Pasek and Paul and Joe Iconis from the kind of early mid to late 2000s. I was on YouTube a lot during that time, and I was mostly watching single camera videos of single songs from cabarets, and and thinking, what a great song, and what a great artist. And then I was looking at their MySpace pages, or and listening to their early attempts with someone like Adam Guan of like podcasting. Adam Guan had a podcast in 2007 of his songs, which I before podcasts were in any way mainstream.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I started Signal, it was like I wanted there to be an archive or like a capture of all of these songs, so that people in other places could sort of dig through them like I had dug through them, whether or not they ever would. I remember thinking, we put them up. Every song that's ever been performed at Signal is on YouTube, and I remember 50 views, 100 views, nothing much, but I just remember thinking we had to keep doing it, because in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, like when these writers' paths are more fully formed, you'd be able to sort of look back in the way that I was able to look back. I remember when Smash was on, and there were all of these writers in season 2 of Smash, like Pasek and Paul and Joe Iconis, who I'd seen their songs on YouTube 10 years earlier, and I just remember thinking that was cool and would mean something at some point, which, to be honest, is a lot of my thinking is always like, I don't know what this means today, but like it might mean something someday. So even with Signal, I still honestly never thought of really about live streaming shows. It was only when this terrible 2020 started, and the pandemic started in March, that we decided to do Signal online. And because Signal had always been filmed and captured, it was like, oh, we'll figure out how to do that. And when figuring out how to do that, we suddenly realized that the best way of doing it was using live streaming software, and did weeks and weeks, 10 or more of these digital concerts, in a way just more to experiment and to like give writers and me something to do.
Mm-hmm.
And as that was happening, I suddenly realized, do you know what? This would be a lot easier if small group of us were in a room than if we're all in separate rooms. And it would be even better if instead of having to use webcams, we could use actual cameras. And it would be even better if, rather than each person having to do their own individual sound setup in their own room, their own bedroom, like we could go back to having one sound desk and that stuff. And it suddenly came from having nothing in March, April, May, June. It suddenly was like, okay, once it gets slightly safer or slightly less locked down, and a few of us can gather in a room, how can we skill up or level up this online thing? And that's what led to the idea of doing digital shows. It didn't ever really come from a history of having filmed my shows, I suppose.
Were you, as associate director, on Merrily We Roll Along, were you involved in the filming of that at all?
Yeah, actually, I was. I helped not call the cameras, as it were. They filmed 3 performances of Merrily Roll Along for digital theatre. They had 8 cameras for each performance, and I was in the sort of control room, basically on cans, telling people who were filming where the next essential moments were going to come. So I knew that on the person on the man on the left side of the stage is going to sing the next solo line, and then the man next to the piano is going to sing the next solo line, and the woman by that door is going to sing the next solo line. And because of the speed of a show like Merrily, I was there telling people how, so that they could capture the things that needed to be captured. So yeah, that was 8 pan tilt zoom cameras that were hung in the lighting rig, and people in a separate room with like joysticks and screens capturing that show. But it was just mad. It just so much equipment and so much technology. And I just remember thinking, this is a thing that happens for movies that get broadcast to cinemas, or this is a thing that happens for huge companies. This isn't something like a freelancer, with producing fringe shows for 50 and 100 seats theaters could ever aspire to. So As I said, it didn't come because I thought about filming and releasing work. It came because we started streaming, and then we did live streaming of concerts. Then we thought it would be good to be in a room, and then suddenly it was like, well, now we've done this, maybe we could do a production. So it came from like a different pathway, I suppose, which then looped back round, and suddenly, in some ways, now resembles the process you would do to film a musical. But I think one of the ways I'm really evangelical about liveness is because of the path that got me here. I love film, and I'm really wary of theatre being bad films, or theatre makers making low budget things that are poor quality. So I guess I'd never really. I love watching films, but I've never really been interested in making films, I suppose. So it's kind of a surprise that I'm here. But as I said, it feels like we are finding, and we're struggling. And I know not everyone on either side agrees, but I think we're finding a new form that exists somewhere between theatre and film. I don't think it's one or the other, and I think it has cinematic elements and theatrical elements and loads of other kind of durational or long form or elements. But yeah.
So this is my favorite question of all time. What should we call it? What is this thing that is in between? It's not quite live theater and it's not a film. So what is it?
I mean, I think I'm, not to cop out, I think I'm still on my way to figuring that out. Maybe I'll figure out in my waffle now. I I really care about labels because I think they help clarify things. And so early on in, at the end of last year, I remember I was saying how I think we should try and find a boundary between the word live stream and the word stream, just because I think even if a stream is at a certain time, if you're streaming a pre-made film, that's different from live streaming. I think that's important that people understand the difference between streaming something that's been made and live streaming, where you're making something live and broadcasting it at that very moment. Yeah, I definitely want to know if something is a streamed film or a live streamed a what is it, a streamed film, and I want to know if it's made under show conditions, or I want to know if it's made with separate shots and edits, and I also want to know if something is made live. So if I were to call it something, I would probably just call it live stream theatre. But at the moment, yeah.
I know it's a torturous question because like you say, we don't really have the word. We have individual labels for it, but I feel that the general public and even people within the industry don't yet know the difference between, for example, Hamilton being a capture of the show that was filmed like Merrily We Roll Along over several performances and then it's edited together, or something like the last 5 years, the movie musical. Like there's a difference between them. One is filmed on stage with an audience, and then one is filmed on set conditions and it's filmed out of order and edited together.
For me, and again, I know there would be debate here. I think one of the key things that makes theatre is that you construct a show, and as a director, you kind of construct a show so that it is repeatable. And the way that you construct it so it's repeatable is so that it can be, hopefully in an ideal world, done for an audience 8 times a week, and that it will have each one will be unique, but it will also sort of be the same kind of rule set for every single performance, and it will run continuously. And I think as soon as you chop a piece of theatre up, I think that's when it starts becoming film. And I think film used to be, when a camera was first invented, a camera was put in, the back of a theatre essentially, and was used to film unbroken theatre. And it was when editing was invented that film became its own medium, editing and juxtaposition and things being constructed non-linearly and different unity of time. So I think the fact that editing and retaking is what turned theatre into film, I think preserving unity of time and single takes and kind of like the constructed theatrical reality is what turns film back into theatre, I think, which is why I really want to know if something is filmed in a single. The trouble is, none of it's very easy to say, but like it'd be very easy for people to just say filmed in one take, or captured in multiple takes, and or live streamed in the present. The term I always use for the stuff that I've been doing this past year is performed and streamed live, because I think that by saying those two things together, you get that the performance and the streaming are both concurrent. But people just want to sell tickets, so people aren't particularly interested in doing what's most accurate. They're interested in what will engage an audience to buy the ticket the most. But I think in the long run, I worry that that's a damaging tactic, because I think we're like sort of confusing audiences as to what they're paying for. And I don't think people should pay as much for a single performance that can be shown infinite amount of times as they are paying to actually literally receive the broadcast from a room where people are all doing their job that moment. That is a more special and it takes more work and more effort. And I don't think we should be conflating them. But I also think until you've experienced a proper live stream, the risk of it, the ephemeral nature of it, I don't know if people understand why it's different than a film. But I hope that the more of it people see, the more people might grow to understand. It would be different getting to tune into tonight's performance of Hamilton than it would to just watch that one from 2 years ago, or 3 years ago. Well, it was ages ago, wasn't it? That was
4 years
captured.
ago
There's
now.
something amazing.
5 almost.
Yeah, there's something amazing about watching what is a cultural artifact. But I think the whole idea of film is that it exists as a cultural artifact from the moment that it is released. And we can go back and watch a film from the 90s or the 80s and the 70s, and it exists in tension with our current temporality. Whereas I think the idea of theatre is it always exists in both the moment of its creation and in the moment of its performance. So there's this kind of stacked temporality, which I think is what we find so engaging. Like, a show was made 40 years, Chorus Line was made 30 years ago, but we're also watching it tonight. And the people on stage are experiencing the resonances of it tonight. And I also love that idea of watching different casts on film, in the same way that I did always find myself quite frustrated that once one cast recording had been made, it was often very hard for a second or a third or a fifth cast recording to be made. So the show almost got froze at the moment of its first production, which I don't think theatre does. Different casts, different days, different things. So I think trying to preserve
as the saying goes, a musical is never finished, it's only rewritten.
Absolutely. And of my however many cast recordings of Follies, I had the original, and then I had the London cast recording, and I had the Paper Mill Playhouse recording, and I had the 1985 concert recording, and each of them different, and each of them, and when we did the RINK, there are 2 cast recordings. There's a London cast recording. There's there's the original Broadway cast recording. There are loads of other recordings of those songs from over the years, and each new production of something, we were lucky to be given permission by the late Terence McNally, which is very sad, to actually create something out of past versions. And there is something amazing about that. The theatre isn't just an artifact. It's of this moment, of this very moment that we're living right now. And there's something about the interaction between those two things that is endlessly fascinating.
Couldn't agree more. So the cast recording of Shift Alt-Right was just released, and it's now available on Spotify, Apple Music, and TikTok, with music and lyrics by Hilmi Jaiden. And it's an original digital musical performed and streamed remotely. For folks who missed it, can you tell us more about that production?
Yeah, I mean, it's if I go too deep into the weeds, you can just cut this. But it was we had been doing Signal Online, which was a live concert where we would go to different people's sort of living rooms and offices and writing rooms all over the country and the world, and they would sing songs. And the way that the show worked is we would use a live piece of live streaming software to collate sort of, I guess it was 15 to 20 different streams, so that we could switch from, room to room, back and forth from me to the artist. And it was all live. And we used sound routing. Each person, I spent an hour on Zoom with each person who was taking part in it to set up their sound, their end, to make sure that it was sort of the sound was good quality, which took ages, but it was locked down, so we all had a bit of time. And so we did these concerts, and Hilmi started writing, did a few of them, and wrote songs for them from this idea he had for a musical called Shift Alt+Right, which largely took place online. And he basically said, after he'd written the first song, he basically said that he was constructing it so that it could be done the same technology that he was witnessing, that we were using to do a Signal Online concert. So it's 4 performers, but they could all be in their own rooms, and the entire sort of mechanism of the show was, Skype or message chats or telephone calls, the way that we're communicating when we're separate from one another. So he literally saw the form of a digital live concert and wrote a content that was for that form, a content that necessitated that form, I suppose. The idea being it's 4 performers, they're all in separate rooms or locations, and it can be performed live. And he sent it to me, and I just loved the idea of taking what had been a concert, and wasn't without its complexity, but with song by song by song, and thinking, could we sustain it for 45 minutes to an hour and do a full show? I became really attached to the idea of making a new musical, because I'm like constantly trying to make new musicals, and getting theatres and producers and gatekeepers to engage with new, disruptive, strange work by writers they've never heard of is difficult, and getting through the door of theatres is difficult. And I've been really obsessed with the idea of, could we create new theatre without theatres, without a building, without a gatekeeper, without a producer saying yes? So when he was like, well, we can just stream it, it can just exist on the internet, it doesn't need a theatre, and it's designed for that. So that's what we did. In the end, Max, who played the protagonist Jay, he came to my flat. There were 4 of us in total in my flat, obeying COVID safety. Me, Chris Chorney, who's a technical wizard who'd been helping me this whole time. He was on the sound. I was operating the cameras, and it had our assistant producer Tanya. And so that became kind of mission control. It's a bit like Max being with me at a Signal Online concert, and then the other 3 performers all came in remotely. Only Max sings, which made it easier, because duets are tough in terms of with latency. In fact, they're impossible to do them. We've managed to do some live online duets, but currently the only way of doing them is with neither participant being able to hear the other live. They hear a click track and we hear them together, but it's not the same as hearing another singer, and sort of being able to modify as you go. So yeah, and so we did it at the end of October. We did 4 live performances of it. Unbelievably, we didn't have any technical issues, and it was lovely because all 4 shows are different. And so yeah, the hope is we'll be able to do some encore performances of that this year, which will be us streaming a show that has already been live streamed, so they won't be live, but for people that missed it will be an opportunity to see what we made. But it's exciting to have a cast recording out, because, as I said, my entry gateway drug to all of this was cast recording. So to have made even a small one, even a 4-track one, feels like a bit of a significant milestone, which is lovely.
And given the current world events, the subject matter is very timely. This idea of people being radicalized by being online.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for mentioning that. I mean, yeah, it's definitely Hilmi brilliantly subverts the idea that a musical has to be about a hero and makes it about an anti-hero who we maybe start out sympathizing with, then maybe empathize with, and then probably despise by the end. And in the same way that television gave us people like Walter White or Tony Soprano, I think the idea that everyone has to be lovable in a musical is always worth challenging. But yeah, it's set in 2015 or 2014. I can't specifically remember, but essentially it's just about when the alt-right and them, 4chan and Reddit and Pepe the Frog and the kind of awful beginnings of that movement, but in a weird way, of course. By speaking about then, it feels unfortunately like it's only got more resonant, and it just looks, I suppose, how if we're not careful about people who are lonely or disaffected or experiencing trauma, if we're not careful with them, that they can go down a wrong path. And yeah, there are numerous moments in Shift Alt-Right where we hope that Jay might not go down that path, but I think the piece, the piece has certain ambiguities to it, but yeah, it asks us what it takes to radicalize. And I love the fact that the show takes place within an hour. It's a single unity of time, and we streamed it live. So we had a clock in the back of the show that was set for the exact time that the show started within the show, and the clock actually ticked. Just so if anyone wants to go back and check that there was no editing, that
Wow.
they can.
Oh, that's cool. I love that. That's very difficult.
Yeah, it's well, we just thought, yeah, and actually we're streaming a show this coming week called Public Domain. Hopefully, all being well, if everything stays okay with everyone, and yeah, we're thinking about how we can just show the audience today's newspaper, as it were. Show them that this is happening today.
Yes.
Because I think there's something really exciting for an audience about being, you walk into a theatre and it's happening now. Whereas when something's on a screen, you don't know the layers of artifice that are between you and what you're actually getting. So I'm also just interested in trying to show people, no, like, here's my watch, like, here's today's newspaper,
Yeah.
metaphorically speaking. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting. The National Theatre did some studies a little while ago now that showed that audiences felt, even watching on a screen, they felt that they were part of the show and part experiencing it because they were watching a live broadcast. They felt that they were experiencing it as they would in person and watching it on a screen.
I remember I think when National Theatre Live first started, I may be mixing some memories, but I want to say that one of the first shows was Adrian Lester's Henry V, but I might be mixing my shows up, but that was certainly around that time. Whatever show it was, there was a review of it in the newspaper, which commented on the fact that the audience were like a cinema audience. They had popcorn and they were munching their popcorn and they were slurping their drinks and they were watching trailers, and it very much felt like a film. And as soon as the countdown started and they saw the onstage, they saw the in-house audience and they realized that it was live, the reviewer noticed that everyone just put down their popcorn. They sort of put down their drinks. They felt that, like, to consume or to, like, that there was something going on that they shouldn't be interrupting, even though they were in a cinema in a completely different location. And I subscribe to that belief that there is something different about it if audiences buy into it. And I think the way that they are more likely to buy into it is if it's kind of given to them accurately and sort of I'm never, I'm very passionate about things. I'm rarely actually attempting to start an argument. I'm more likely to be wanting to start a debate, but I just find it disingenuous when people say, we're live streaming this show, and they filmed it a year ago, or they filmed it even a month ago. Like, it's different. It is different, and I think we should just be labeling them differently. And I think the more people that spend time with each, I think they might be surprised by how different it feels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Public Domain, which will be airing next week. I'm very excited.
Me too.
Fabulous, Fox Sister, Catch Me, and The Limit were also all stage musicals that were filmed and streamed live without an audience. What do you think having an audience present in the room would have changed about those performances or those streams? If you think it would have changed it at all.
I think no. I mean, it obviously would have. It obviously would have Catch Me and The Limit were two new musicals that we did at Central School of Speech and Drama. They were filmed and then edited. And
my old course, just a fun
yeah,
coincidence.
great course, and I had such a lovely time despite it being such a weird year. I think we were meant to be doing Merrily We Roll Along
Oh wow.
with that whole year, but when we realized we had to do in bubbles of 6, I suggested new musicals, and they went for it. So again, it was a weird thing that probably would never have happened in an ordinary year, like a silver lining. But it's weird. I think it's nice to have an audience. It's nice for the action on stage to have that feedback, that kind of, even if that feedback isn't laughter or applause, but just that atmosphere in a room, being able to see people's faces, being able to see people's postures, being able to hear the difference between when people stop breathing, and that sort of silence, being able to hear gasps or see the expressions of people's faces, it does create like a feedback loop, I think, between the performance and the audience in person, and it does create an sort of alchemy, which I know that performers miss. On the other hand, I love the idea of hybridization, where there is an in-person audience and it's live streamed, which I really hope will be a part of my practice going forward anyway. I can't see there'll be anything I do going forward that isn't live streamed. Even if it's not live streamed every day, if we get back to an 8-show schedule for something I'm directing, I can't imagine that we wouldn't live stream it at least twice a week. But I suppose the only thing I would be wary of, and I'm thoughtful about, is trying to not create a hierarchical experience where it feels like you're watching an audience in person have a better time or a more intimate time, and you're removed in some way. So the only thing I sometimes think when I watch films of things where there's a live audience, an in-person audience, I should say, is I can sometimes see them laughing or feeling it in certain shots, and I feel somewhat excluded from that being at home. And when there's a live stream and there is no in-person audience, I do feel like there is a democracy to that, which is everyone is having the exact same experience. But in the end, I think it's just about trying to find a balance, which isn't better or worse. It's just two different things. The metaphor I keep going back to, which I inevitably read about somewhere, which is the difference between being in a football stadium to watch a match versus watching it at home on TV, on live TV, and thinking, I've got quite poor eyesight, so I love watching football games in a stadium, but you've got a fixed view. You sometimes can't see everything. You haven't got a commentary, so you don't exactly always know everything that's happening at every moment. And there's atmosphere, and there's like an in-person buzz to it. But one of the great things about watching it from home is you get to see close-up cameras, you get to hear commentary, you get to have editing, so you get to see different views of different things that suit different moments, and you get a different type of authorship to that. So I think it gives as much as it takes. I absolutely Fabulous Fox Sister, 2 of our cameras were based on the view that you would get from a seat in the Southwark Playhouse auditorium. And I think there was a wide shot, which you wouldn't get in any seat because no one's got a widescreen lens. You wouldn't be able to capture all of that. But there were two camera views, the left and right camera view, which basically felt like you were sitting in the auditorium and looking at the stage. But we spent probably 40% of the show on a close-up that no audience member would ever have, that felt more cinematic. And a similar thing will be happening in the public domain. We'll be wanting to have cameras that make you feel like you are in the theatre, and ones that make you feel like you are getting a extra privilege from being at home. And I think just trying to balance that so that everyone gets something of an advantage by being there. Like, I think so in the past, live streams were just a bad sound and a single camera at the back, which was a definite disadvantage from not being in the room. But I think just elevating that form and balancing it off against being there, because I've got to watch so many things in other countries during the past year. I got to watch live performances from the Public Theatre. I've got to watch live performances from the Met. I couldn't go to them on a normal day. I've watched live performances from Australia, and people in those places have got to watch my shows. Shift Alt+Right streamed from my flat, and afterwards I got texts from friends in countries all around the world chatting to me about it because they had just left the theatre, the virtual theatre. There's something amazing about that. And that's, I spent the first 3 months of COVID shielding because I was on treatment. And let's never forget that there are people who this form of accessibility is going to be life-changing and give them access to things that they just couldn't have access to. My 94-year-old grandmother got to see The Fabulous Fox Sister, and she hasn't seen a piece of mine in 5 years because just getting to the theatre is too difficult. So it means a lot. And
the potential for opening up access to theatre with streaming and captures is so exciting. And I think the pandemic has shifted in the industry, certainly in the US, the possibilities of it, and the, like you said, the democratization of it, and that the fact that it exists. I talk to so many people who are like, oh, filming theater is a thing, how and why? And that has definitely shifted in the past year.
Yeah, I think it's just important to just keep on interrogating it as an industry, as practitioners, and also show by show, because I would say, especially with Shift Alt+Right, Fabulous Fox Sister, Public Domain, we knew going in that we were making them without an in-person audience. And each of them in its own way has been, the process of making them and writing them and presenting them has been interrogated as we've gone along. Like we've thought about cameras from moment one, and editing, and kind of like the way lenses and views and framing from almost the moment that we decided to do them. And I think in the past, as I, looping back to the beginning, but like in the past, you'd put on the show and you would only think about the theatre and the room and the audience in the room. And if it were ever filmed, that would just be someone turning up for a day, capturing what they captured, and leaving. It's very different. It's very different being able to kind of steer aim the experiences so that they meet in the middle, going, okay, this is what the in-person experience is like, and this is what the digital experience is like, and trying to make them meet in the middle rather than just go, it's an in-person experience with a bit of filming on the side, or it's a film with a bit of in-person on the side. Like, I think more and more we're I think going to be able to balance them. And let's be honest, like NT Live and Met Live are amazing, as of other things, but those are the two I've experienced most of in the last decade. And I think the thing is just, it felt unaffordable, but and impossible to learn. And I daren't even say how little we've spent on kit and technology and skilling up on, but it's, I imagine it's, conservatively speaking, probably a thousandth of what it takes to film one NT live, maybe even 10,000th. So I think the idea that you need all of that, that it isn't open to being democratized, is a foolish misconception, of which I have been subject to. I really just thought, I'll never do that. It'd be too expensive. I'll never manage it. I'm, as terrible as this year's been, I'm grateful for being forced into realizing how essential this can be and how manageable it can be. I didn't know that any of this was affordable, and I wouldn't have done any of this if it weren't have been for this strange year, this impossible year. And I have to take this as a silver lining, that it's shown that technology, and I when I was 15, I was also playing online video games and spending time building, taking components out of my family computer and breaking it and learning, and putting new graphics cards into things, and playing with all sorts of software to try and optimize online gaming. And it's so weird that the skills I had when I was 15, I'm now reusing 20 years later for the first time in this pandemic, to go, oh, that's how we'll, not that we use it anymore, but in April of 2020, we were using Soundflower to root sound. And the last time I remember hearing Soundflower was, probably in 2002. So it's just the idea of just coming back to past obsessions and kind of integrating them has been satisfying, I suppose.
Yeah, that's all the skills. Nothing learned is ever wasted.
No.
I know we're running short on time, but I would love to ask, can you speak to the union rules in the UK for streaming, how that has helped or hindered in being able to put content online?
Yeah, I do know. I was in a conversation with some American producers at one point, and despite having wanting to live and make work in America and New York my whole life, my whole adult life, I said to them, "Oh man, this conversation is the first time I'm really glad I live in the UK, just because there are more options with regards to streaming and filming and recording work in the UK. It seems to me, I'm not an expert on it by any means, but it does seem that there is more flexibility within actor contracts, and there's more flexibility within theatre contracts, to be able to record and stream work in a way that makes it sort of affordable and possible, actually. And I think I've heard people in America say that their hands are tied with regards to being able to get work recorded or streamed, or get people together and charge money for it, and start sort of making it financially possible, or do it while there are still productions, in-person productions planned, and that does seem a shame. But at the same time, any new medium is liable to be used to rip people off and write people out, and I think sometimes rushing too quickly can mean that contracts are badly written, or that, as I say, people are forgotten. I've heard stories now of big productions going online in the UK, and people who helped make them being sort of forgotten in the royalties, or not even spoken to, and that stuff's really tough to hear. But I think all forms change and evolve, and I think looking at theatre, I also think looking at film theatre with the same contracts as we look at for film, or the same rights bundles as we look at for film, seems problematic to me, because they are different forms. I remember hearing that someone wanted to film a stage production and distribute it, and they couldn't because the film rights were already acquired, and thinking, I don't think a theatre filming their stage production of something is in any way competing with with something that's got film rights sold, and just trying to find a way of doing that. But I just hope that, as I said, people reevaluate and rethink constantly and try and be pragmatic and leave room and flexibility for new approaches, because, as I said, where I am now from a year ago is unimaginable in terms of the approaches that I'm involved in, and like goodness knows where we'll be in a year. Like new software and new ways of capturing and new ways of working with artists in different locations. And all I would say is I've been doing new work that's very small in the grand scheme of things, and I always, try and be as transparent and as upfront and as honest as I can with everybody. I don't doubt, not that I'm trying to slander myself, I don't doubt that I've made mistakes or there've been bumps in the road in terms of that transparency, but all you can do is just keep the dialogue open and keep evolving. And if someone gets in touch with me and says, actually, I think we should be prioritizing this or trying to do this better, then I'll always try. I think in the long run, for me, I don't think that digital theatre cannibalizes real theatre, in-person theatre. I shouldn't call it real theatre. Who am I? I don't think. I don't think.
What have we just been talking about for the
I
last
know,
hour?
I know. But, old habits die hard. I don't think digital theatre will cannibalize in-person live theatre. In fact, I think it will enhance it. I think the amount of people queuing up to see Hamilton will be enhanced by the Disney Plus release, not cannibalized. I think. I think I'm very interested in making live digital theatre not around forever. Even if it's archived forever, I like the idea that it is around for a certain period of time, and it then speaks as an artifact to the moment that it is being sent out and then re-sent out. But I also think we need to work hard to make sure that we can monetize it correctly, because it has a value and it has a cost to make it. And I think one of the risks is that we don't, early months of the pandemic, everyone on earth was dumping content for free. And one of the things I've been outspoken about is that, music, journalism, we don't expect to pay for them anymore. And those things are having to claw back that sense of prestige and money. And I think we have to make sure that we don't let the genie entirely out of the bottle with regards to monetizing content. So even though early on I did a lot of things for donations rather than for tickets, I doubt I will do that again, because I think what we're making has an intrinsic value, and got to sort of celebrate that value, charge fairly and accessibly, try and create options for those who can't afford it, but at the same time do that so that there's revenue coming in so that everyone could be paid fairly. And yeah,
absolutely, could not agree more. So to wrap up today, I could keep talking to you for hours. I have like 10 more questions in my that I'd wrote before we were chatting, and now I have 20 more. So I'd love to keep chatting, but can't talk all day. So I have some quick questions. You don't need to think about them too deeply, whatever comes to mind, and there are no wrong answers.
Okay.
So what is your favorite musical?
Probably Sunday in the Park with George, but or The Band's Visit, if I had to pick.
Where do you stand on bootlegs?
Broadly, I'm pro bootleg. I think that I had a bootleg of Hamilton, and I won't watch it again because it's now been superseded by a much higher quality way of watching the show. And I tend to believe, when I had bootlegs of shows, I only listened to them because there was no access to other things. So I think they're a great way of people building affiliation and enjoyment for a show. I understand that at the same time that they are a type of theft, but I think hopefully it builds fandom and hopefully encourages people to create legitimate pathways to watch and share that material further down the line.
Absolutely. What do you wish had been filmed?
Of my work, I wish my production of Songs for a New World had been filmed with Cynthia Erivo, Jenna Russell, Dean John Wilson, and Damien Humbly. It was,
Yes.
I was pretty proud of that, and it was, I think a shame that doesn't exist on film, and they were extraordinary.
Maybe there is a bootleg floating around.
I hope so, but I wish I could go back and film it with 7 cameras, but
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. What would you like to see filmed in the future?
Oh, I maybe a bit of a broad answer, but I want at least one streamed performance per week of every show in the West End on Broadway. I don't think it has to be all 8 shows, but I think, wouldn't it be cool if, like, every Tuesday night, every show on Broadway and in the West End was streamed, and there were hybrid rigs in every one of them? So, yeah, more or less everything. But I'll go back and just say, if I could watch the Band's Visit musical every day, I'd be a lot happier. So the Band's Visit.
So Public Domain will be live streamed from Southwark Playhouse on January 15th and 16th. And tickets are available at Southwark Playhouse. The link for that will be in the show notes. Mm-hmm. And where can we find you online, Adam?
My personal account is at Adam Lenson on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and my producing accounts are at ALP Musicals. They're both just me, but broadly speaking, one of them is company stuff and the other is me stuff. Yeah, my personal account, it tends to have lots of opinions about things, which I'm trying to make sure that people understand are like not meant to be mean, but are just me trying to put forward my opinions. But yeah, you'll definitely get some opinions if you follow me on Twitter about musicals and live streaming and digital theatre and all sorts of things. And it's also just worth saying I have a book coming out at the end of this year, which I think we've agreed is going to be called Breaking Into Song, Why You Shouldn't Hate Musicals. Working title, but there'll be some stuff about digital theatre in there, but lots about musicals.
Wonderful. Very much looking forward to that.
Yeah. Well, it's been really fun. So, as you said, we could probably talk 3 hours and
yes. No, thank you so much for your time. It's been really great to chat. Filmed Live Musicals is a labor of love, and we'd like to thank everyone who makes it possible. Thank you to our patrons, Josh Brandon, Mercedes Esteban, Rachel Esteban, David Negrin, Jesse Rabinowitz and Brenda Goodman, Al Monaco, David and Catherine Rabinowitz, and Beck Twist for your support. If you'd like to support Filmed Live Musicals, please like and review on your podcast app. Find us on Twitter at Musicals on Screen and on Facebook at Filmed Live Musicals. If you'd like to support the site financially, you can find us at patreon.com/musicals on screen. No matter what level you are able to pledge, you receive early access to written content and early access to this very podcast. Visit www.filmedlivemusicals.com to learn more. Thanks for listening.